Have you ever needed to control the opacity of a background image without affecting the text or other content within that element? Let's say we have something like this and I want the text to stand out. It would be nice if I could turn the opacity down on this background image. Same thing's happening here in these smaller boxes where there's just not enough contrast between the text and then the background image. So it would be great if we could do something like this where we are able to lower the opacity without having to affect the image. Doing this with code gives us the ability to be able to make changes to the amount of opacity. We could even do like color overlays or something like that. We have a lot more options available to us. So let's look at how we can do this. We'll be working from this file right here, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller and show you what code I'm starting with. My HTML is really simple. I just have an article with a class of hero that contains an H1. That's this top section. And then the bottom section, I have a section tag with a class of container that contains 3 articles, and they have classes of box, and each one has its own unique class of box 1, 2, 3. Here's my starting CSS. Most of this is pretty basic. I'll just go through it real quickly so that you know where we're starting with. I'm importing a Google font, using the universal selector to zero out padding and margin, setting the font to that particular font family, and setting box sizing to border box. On the body, I have a width of 100% and a margin of auto. On the hero element, I'm specifying a height, margin bottom of 2 which is just creating some space right here. I'm using a display of flex and justify content center to be able to horizontally center my text within this box. I have padding on the top of 14 to push the text down. And then I'm loading in my background image, and I'm telling it not to repeat and to be positioned via center. And we're using background size cover, so it will expand based on how wide my page is. Next, I have some rules for the H1, and I just have font size, color, and then I'm giving it a drop shadow. The container, which is the element that's appearing around these 3 squares, that has a width of 80%. I'm using margin auto, display flex, and I have the flex direction set to row, which is actually not necessary since this is the default direction. On the box elements, I'm setting padding and margin, width and height, setting the text color to white, font size, font weight. I'm using display flex, and I'm using flex end for justify content and align items to position the text in the lower right-hand corner. We have a text shadow rule, and then on the background size, I'm setting it to contain, no repeat, and center. And then for each unique box, I have the background color and the actual image that I'm using, which are SVG images. So that's what we're going to start with, and then we're going to add the code that we need, the CSS code, to be able to control with code the opacity of the background images. Now in CSS, there is no property as of yet that you can use to change the opacity of only the background image. So unlike background colors, which would allow us to specify an alpha channel to control opacity using RGBA, for instance, it doesn't exist for the background image property. And this is what you would get if you tried to control the opacity. So if I went in here and I'd set the opacity on this element to like 0.5 and I refresh, you can see that it actually dims out the background image, but also the text. So again, if I was to put this on our hero image, so I'm just going to come up here to the hero, which has the background image, and if we set our opacity to 50%, you can see how it just dims out everything. So what I actually want to do is dim out the picture, but not the content that's within that particular element. So let's just get rid of these opacity settings since that's not what we want to do. It is worth mentioning that opacity changes on a parent are going to get inherited to all those children elements. So any child element will inherit that opacity setting, which is why it doesn't work. So you're going to end up with all the elements, both the background images and the text, having that reduced opacity. So what can we do? Well, this is where I'm going to teach you this nifty little trick. To fix this issue, we're going to put the background image into a child element of the parent. And this is going to ensure that the background image and the text content will essentially be on their own layer within the parent. And then we'll be able to control each layer's opacity without affecting one and the other. And one approach to be able to do this is to use the pseudo element of the parent element. So we'll start off with our hero image. I'm going to go ahead and make a new selector of .hero, and then I'm going to set my pseudo class of before. And we are going to need to use the content property and just set that to, empty setting. It doesn't really have to contain anything, but it needs to have something in it so we can kind of style it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to set the background image. So I'm actually going to grab this rule, the background image, we're going to cut that, and we'll put this on the before, and we'll grab the cover as well. So let's just cut those out of hero, and we'll go ahead and add them into the hero before element. And then what I'm going to do, so if we save this now and we go back and refresh our page, you can see how no image is showing. That is because I need to add a position, and I'm going to choose position of absolute on this element. In order to absolutely position this particular element, I need to set position on the parent element. So we'll have this position as relative. And then back in the pseudo class of the hero before, let's go ahead and let's set top to 0, bottom to 0, left to 0, and right to 0. So all the way around, I'm going to set these to 0. So let's take a look at what we have. And if I refresh, you can see I get what I had before. Now the text is no longer showing up, and that's because our hero pseudo class is absolutely positioned. So it, of course, is going to be in front of any other content. So all we have to do to have the text come back is come to our hero h1. And if we just set our z index to something higher than what we had, I'll just set it to 10, and we save, we get back to what we had previously. So now is where the magic comes in. Now, if I go ahead and set opacity on the pseudo class element, and let's just set this to like 0.5, 50%, you can see that we have the ability to reduce this down. And now my text is standing out much differently. And I think just to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to actually give this a white drop shadow rather than the kind of dark gray. That'll just make that jump out. So I like that a little bit better. And, this is code. So if I decide I want it to be lighter, I can just reduce it down with the code and that will immediately update. Or if I decide I want it to be a little darker, I can just make that adjustment on the fly and update. So I really like this technique because it allows you to be able to control the opacity of the element with code so you can easily update and make changes to it at any point. So now let's do the same sort of thing for these box elements. So once again, I'm just going to come down to this area, and for this particular portion, I am going to go into the box element. We're going to do the same sort of thing here. So on the box element, we're going to remove our background size, background repeat, and background position rules. I'll just cut those. And we're going to be making a box : before. And we can paste those in to the before. I'm going to need my content setting just like we did previously. So I'll just set the content to nothing. And then we're going to do the same sort of thing. We'll just do position absolute. We'll set our top, bottom, left, and right all to 0. And then I'll go ahead and set my opacity. And my opacity is going to be, let's just try 0.4. And remember, because I'm using position absolute on the parent element, I'm going to need to turn my position to relative. And finally, I need to actually move the images into the pseudo classes for before. So all of my individual elements are going to use the before pseudo class, so dot box 1 before, and then I'm going to grab my background image and we'll just cut that and place it down here. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing for the additional boxes. So I'll just copy this, and then it's easy enough for me to change the numeric values so that they are correct. This is going to be box 3, and we'll display image 3. And then we need to get rid of the images in the box elements. All right, if we save and refresh, you can see that now that dims that out. And then once again, I can change that at any time. This is a dynamic way of creating this sort of effect because, I can change it. It's all code based. So that pseudo element is kind of like a child of the parent, and we can change the opacity of the pseudo element, that child element, without affecting the text content, which is still located within the parent element. And we're using the position absolute and setting all of the various values to 0 so that that new pseudo element is the same size as the parent. And we need to set the content properties, otherwise the element isn't going to show up, the pseudo element. And you can kind of play around with this. Like if we wanted to maybe, use a kind of a color overlay, like if I come back here to my hero, I could move the image back onto the hero. So now it's going to be a background of the hero. And then on the pseudo class element, I'm just going to set my background color, and we'll use an RGBA value. So let's use maybe 253, 11, and 197. I have no idea what color this is, so it'll be a surprise. And we'll just say like 0.4. So let's just see what we get. Might be hideous. Oops, these should be commas. All right, let's see what we're getting. Oh, it's pink. Okay, and you can see how it kind of puts that overlay, and if I wanted that to be darker, I just change my CSS, and there you go. Well, that's really not very pretty at all, but anyways, you can come in here and manipulate this as needed, and it'll allow you to be able to really kind of control this background image in a more dynamic fashion. So I found this to be extremely helpful in my quest to just build out some web pages and make them dynamic so I would have a little bit more flexibility. Sometimes I like to put background images, but I might want to be able to control the opacity of those background images. So now you know how to do that. All right, I hope you found this useful. Enjoy.